What's up YouTube? Welcome back to Habitually Handy. Today we're talking about how to set up an airless paint sprayer. I shot this footage the last time that I shot when we were using the airless paint sprayer at the renovation project. And so I thought I'd make a whole different video out of it because it's kind of a long process. And so here we go. Okay, so we're gonna go through the sprayer and set it up. And I'll just show you how it goes together and how to prime it and do all those kinds of things. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change some of these filters because they're super disgusting and they're cheap. And so I figured I would just change them instead of trying to clean them. So that's what a new one looks like. That's what the old one looks like. So get rid of that. Put this new filter on. So this is the suction screener. So it's really, this is just filtering out like big, like goobs of paint. Like this isn't your actual filter for the paint that's coming down the line to the gun. The actual filter is in here, and you can see that this one is also fairly disgusting. So we're gonna replace it with this one. Just make sure they look about the same before I open the package. So there's a number of different filter sizes that you can get for these, and it depends on what you're spraying. If you're spraying latex, you want like a 50 micron. Or sorry, I think it's a 60 actually. Yeah, it's a 60 mesh. And then if you're spraying lacquers and like enamels and stuff, then you want to go to a finer mesh because the tip sizes get smaller for those paints, and so you run the risk of clogging your nozzle when you don't run the right filter. So we just put this in here, threads in like that. The next thing we want to do is we want to get our hose set up. Basically, one end of the hose screws onto this right here. Just going to wipe that off. So I'm basically just going to thread this on. You definitely want to tighten this with a wrench because the pressure in this hose is really high. So the idea behind an airless sprayer is that this is basically just a really big smart pump, and you set how much pressure you want on this knob, and depending on what material you're spraying and what tip you're using and all those kinds of things, it will pressurize that pressure and hold that pressure. So as you spray, it will attempt to maintain that pressure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk this hose out and get it laid out so that it's not all in a big tangle, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to prime this thing. And we're back. So this is the gun that you use to spray. This hooks on, the other end of the hose hooks onto the gun. And it gets tightened. If you're using a gun extension, now's a good time to put it on. And I don't tighten these with a wrench. I just tighten them hand tight. Mostly because I don't ever have the right size wrench. But with the tips and this part, they don't seem to leak as bad as these will. So that's just my experience. Maybe it's because you can't get as much purchase on those when you go to tighten them, but that seems to have been my experience. So now what you want to do is you want to get yourself your waste pail, and bucket of paint. Hopefully I don't spill it, because that would be catastrophic. Can you imagine? Just like, that would be very bad. So your suction tube, just make sure there's not a bunch of dust or guns or anything on it. Your suction tube, actually, you know what? Where am I gonna put it so that it sits in there nicely? I'm gonna move this back over here. Oh gosh. Suction tube is gonna go into the paint. Look nice. Then this is your return line from the pump. So basically what this thing is doing is it's sucking paint in, pressurizing it, and then what it doesn't use, it's returning to the paint bucket. So it's a closed loop. But the problem is that this thing is full of water and whatever we used to clean it last time. So we don't want to put that back into our paint. We want to contain it in the waste pail. The other thing that I need to do right away before we start is use some of this stuff. So this little part here is like the body of the pump. That's like where the magic happens in the pump. And what you're supposed to do is put some of this lubricant in there to keep everything working as it should. So they say a couple drops. I've never been able to give a couple drops, so I just give it a squirt. And then we can plug this thing in. Make sure it's off. So the first thing you want to do is you want to turn this black knob down. So that puts this in the prime position. So basically it's not going to try and pump any paint down the line. It's just going to set up the circuit and start your return system working. When we get this covered in paint, we'll just wipe it off, turn it on, and then you just start cranking up your pressure knob. See all the water coming out of here? So we're just gonna pump that until this clean paint starts coming out of that. So now we got good paint coming out of there. I'm gonna turn this down. Now, the return line goes into the paint bucket. So now we don't have any issues with the paint that's in the pump and in these two lines. We have to do the same thing for the gun. So, word to the wise, when you're priming this line, you want to basically hold the trigger on the gun all the time. Work all your controls with one hand, but don't let go of the trigger. Because as soon as you let go of the trigger, this line builds like 2000 PSI plus of pressure. And then you basically have a giant super soaker of paint. And when you go to squirt it into the bucket, it goes bam, and it comes out and covers you in paint. So I've heard. Never done that myself, ever. So, I'm just holding the trigger down in the gun. We're just gonna let this line fill with paint. It's not working. Oh, so this here, I've left this in the prime position. So we have to move this to the hose position. So that's the position it'll always be in when it's running. You can see the hose is shaking as it pushes paint through it. And you can see all that water coming out of there. So now we're getting good paint out. So what we want to do is we want to turn down the pressure on the pump and turn it off before we release the trigger. There. So now we're good. Now we can put our tip on. So I'm gonna make sure your tip is relatively clean. And then this is your tip holder. So this is basically just prevents you from knocking your tip, and it just protects the tip and holds it basically. So we're gonna put that on to the end of the gun. And I usually, what I do is I'll index it like sort of 2 points of the clock off from tight, and then I'll tighten it as much as I can, and then move the whole thing together. And that basically will get it tight enough that that it won't leak, essentially. And then this little tip, you can see it's got a square side on this side and a round side on this side. So it indexes into the gun, or into the tip rather. Oh, see, I've tightened it now. So this basically indexes into the tip like this, and then spins. Conveniently, it's shaped like an arrow, so you know which way paint is gonna flow. If you're spraying and you clog your tip, you'll know right away, because it'll go like shh, and then it'll make like a sound, and your spray pattern will go from a nice fan to like droplets and crap coming out. So if that happens, what you can do is you can spin this around and you can blow paint through the tip the opposite direction. But you just want to make sure that you don't do that into your wall. You like aim it at the ground or something like that, clear the tip, and then you can spin it back around. So now we're basically set up to spray. So if we were going to spray right away, what we would do is we would turn our pump on, we would set our dial to the pressure that we want to spray. So for a paint like this, they recommended at the paint store that I should be spraying at like 75 to 85%. So I would just set the dial so the arrow is sort of up in here. And then once I have that set, I'm gonna check the fan pattern on like that piece of plastic over there. And if we have striping at the edges or whatever's going on, we'll just adjust based on that. And yeah, now once your pressure has built in your system, you want to put your safety on whenever you're not spraying, because this will actually shoot paint so hard that it can actually break your skin, and you can get paint into your system and stuff like that. So we don't want to do that. So I'm going to charge it up. We'll go over there and we'll just spray a little test piece on that plastic and see how the pattern looks. Okay, so I'm just going to spray this and see what the pattern looks like. So just a nice stroke. So that actually looks pretty good. There's sometimes you'll see on either side there will be like a thin spot and then a heavy spot. Like there would be a thin spot here and then sort of a tiger stripe out towards the edges. But this looks pretty good. So we're ready to start spraying. So I don't think that we're going to spray today because we're kind of running out of time. But the really handy thing about these airless sprayers is that if you have a bucket of water, the only part of this system that's really exposed to air, everything is air-free inside this pump. So the only thing that's really exposed is the tip. So if you just throw that into a bucket of water like that, and you shut the pump off overnight, and lay something over top of this paint pail, we can come back tomorrow and it's all set up for us and ready to go, and we'll just start spraying tomorrow. So that is how we set up an airless sprayer. Okay guys, that's it. Hopefully you got something out of it. Like, comment, subscribe. Appreciate it. Really helps out. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.